Matt, that was great. Thank you. I'm Mike Oster with Cisco Systems in Ottawa. And my question is, with all the wonderful things that this community can do, how would you describe the broadband requirements? Upstream, downstream, aggregate, etc., keeping in mind that Japan is 62 meg on average, Korea is 49 meg on average, and Canada right now is around 2 meg on average. So,
yeah, and again, that average is skewed by our urban our urban environments. It's significantly lower as soon as you leave the urban environment. For the applications that I showed off your beginning screen there, what they decided on was a minimum of 100 megabits to every house and every business for the problems they wanted to solve, for the things that they wanted to do. In terms of utilization of that network, they've got houses that are approaching on a daily basis, so that the peak, we look at peak usage. So what's happening within that home? So you've got 4 televisions. This was before they launched HD, but now they've launched high definition as well. So you've got 4 televisions running in the house, all connected to this network. You've got, and those are all on. You've got somebody on the PC, doing some stuff on the PC, and then you've got all the other peripheral stuff that's happening in the background with, smart appliances and that kind of stuff as well. And so in that kind of environment, we were seeing, sustained throughput out of that house of around the 60 megabit mark. So with HD, you would expect to see that beginning to push much more closer towards the 100 megabit mark within the house. So it's a significant amount of utilization in that home to get the things that they wanted to do. And so that for them was really important. This isn't, for them, it wasn't about surfing the web faster. For them, it was about this whole concept to make sure that you could do, television over this, phone over this, because they wanted competition in those areas. So they built that one set of infrastructure, and all the providers, there was enough bandwidth in that infrastructure that all the providers could compete over that one set of infrastructure. So that's where open access comes from. There you go, Mike. And thanks for not asking which technology that I would select at this time.
We forget that. That's a layer we worry about later.
Exactly.
Any other questions?
And guys, I'm going to stick around until 4 today. I'll be wandering around, listening to kind of the discussions and eating the free food. Yeah, exactly. And so I'll also be available during the course of the day as well.
Hi, Matt. My name is Tammy Sickma. I come from the county of Peterborough. When you were talking about building for what you're planning towards, we all know that a few years back there was only, who's ever going to need more than 64K of memory?
Yep.
So how do you expand on something that you're building for today, 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
It's a really, really important question. One of the lessons that we learned very early on in the community networking developing school of thinking was that it's really easy to make some kind of decision that gets you something now today, without thinking about the future. And the number of initiatives that I know of that were able to raise some money, raise some interest, and I don't want to pick on the incumbent. In some cases, it wasn't the incumbent they gave their money to, but to one provider, a private provider, they gave that money and they said, just get us DSL, and they got DSL. And then 3 years later, they were left going, oh my God, that's not enough. We got to do this again. And then how much harder it was the second time for them to raise, because their credibility shot. And now they're going back to everybody again, going, guys, we're going to have to do this again. We got to get somebody else. Blah 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 blah. So it's really really tough, and really really important to make sure that you've got, as part of your community plan, I believe, long-term community plan, that this your underlying infrastructure should be part of that long-term community plan. In terms of how to do that, again, can't stress enough how important governance is. We get different if just like you can maintain a portfolio of assets in your RRSP in order to mitigate against risk of any one of those assets, The same thing from governance. If you want this thing to live a long time, you have a diversity of people in that governance structure, so that you might get a weaker person who's not as supportive of an initiative in the health thing for a few years, but you've got them really strong on the other places, and they kind of drag them along. So again, governance is hugely important to that ability to keep refreshing and recycling over time. Lastly, again, I would stress how important it is to, when you're making the plan, not to do it on megabits per second. Matt Wenger's definition of broadband. You guys want Matt Wenger's definition of broadband? Matt Wenger's definition of broadband is you have the bandwidth you need to do what you want to do when you want to do it, or what you need to do when you need to do it. That is the definition of broadband. There is a massive, I don't even want to know what to call it, but the movement in the public sector over the last 10 years to define from a policy perspective broadband. I mean, my God, broadband is 1.5 down and 256K up, which was Canada's definition for many, many years, may still be. In America it was 256K is the definition of broadband. And how useful is it to you to have a definition that needs to change every 6 months? And how, as policymakers, are we at things that have to change that frequently? We suck. And so, I'm sorry, am I sitting on the fence on this one? So we need to define our problem set in terms that are realistic to the environment we're working in. Broadband is the amount of bandwidth you need to do what you want. So in Vestaros's cases, broadband was 100 megabits to each and every home. That was the definition of broadband. That is going to change, and they're very well aware of that. And so when you take that definition, rather than trying to pin, okay, it's 10 megs now, we want to be at 100 megs and 400 megs later on, that's the techies getting involved and the sales guys, again, getting involved. We want to stay away from that. We want to say, what are the things that we see happening in this community over the course of the next, and maybe we can't see out 20 years. Maybe we can't see out even 10. Maybe what we do is we look at 5. And we say, okay, here's the vision for our community where we want to be at that point. That is broadband. And so now what are the tools we need in order to be able to get there? And how do we design this thing so it gets there in the most effective and efficient manner? It's kind of ducking the question, but it's an important duck.
Okay, Simon, this will be the last question.
Actually, my question
is this going to be one of these, like Republicans apologizing to the Canadian military for, the introduction they got on Fox News?
Well, at least I can take a hit. My question actually is more relative to the governance structure and understanding that this is going to be a big component of the Eastern Ontario Broadband Caucus and their proposal. Are you looking at coming back and presenting to potential partners on your vision of governance? Because quite frankly, I think that is the most difficult concept for the private sector to embrace, because there are so many different perspectives on this. From one, like we have to work on, you alluded to it, we have return to shareholders, whereas the governance, they don't have to worry about that. Taxpayers' money is unlimited, as we'll find out in the budget in a few days.
We're doing so good there. Yeah, you had the crowd almost borderline sympathetic for a bit, and then that knee came up kind of low. But your point is very, very valid. And the concept of governance becomes increasingly important as you begin. Public sector organizations are actually used to working together with each other for common initiative. The private sector is not that used to working with other private sector organizations to a common initiative. I mean, that's why they're the private sector. They're used to competing. And furthermore, they're really not used to working in joint collaboration with government. I mean, you get on the R&D side, you get a lot more of that, but certainly on the sales and marketing and development and that kind of side, you don't get that very often. And so in a round of, so I'll address two issues that you raised there. Number one, you are spot on the money. I mean, it's why it sits right there in the foundation. The strength of the initiative will be on the ability of that initial leadership to create a collaboration that spans public and private partners, multiple public and multiple private partners. Because if one entity could have solved this problem at this point, they would have. If one entity could have created this vision here, they would have. This is a community. Bell is part of this community. Where do you live? So, I mean, you and your family are part of this community. Other Bell employees who are the linemen, who are the engineers, the network guys, they live in these communities too. And Bell, I'm sure, contributes greatly to the local economy in a whole bunch of different ways, as does Rogers, as does Cogeco. Maybe is Cogeco in this area? Yeah, for Persona, as does a whole bunch of these companies. I don't want to just single out Bell. And so it's important that all of those organizations are brought to bear and engaged. It's going to be uncomfortable for everybody off the beginning. It's not something that you're used to. Particularly the bigger guys, whether it's the bigger public sector or the bigger private sector, is used to coming and going, we do this all. Give us your money and we will solve the problem. The universities will say that, the hospitals will say that, the schools will say it, Bell will say it, Rogers will say it. Everybody will say, we're the one guy that can solve this. That's not what community is about. If we go back to, why did we form communities? Why do humans live in groups? Because it's safer, because we can do things together, because we work together, because your interests and my interests can be aligned such that we can both do better. And that's what it's about. And so Bell is absolutely part of this community and needs to be engaged in a way. But during that process, it's not a bad idea to have somebody in there facilitating because it can be a little rocky at times. But if everybody goes into it knowing that they couldn't solve the problem themselves, they couldn't achieve this vision, but they want to play. They don't want to be left out of the party, and they want to understand what the party is and get engaged from early days so it's not being forced down anybody's throat as to what this is going to look like. What we find is that's a huge boon to making this thing successful. So I hope that addresses the issue.